in a small, peaceful town nestled in the quiet corners of Virginia. The kind of place where neighbors wave from porches and kids ride their bikes until sunset. Something terrible had happened. And while most of the town went about its life unaware, one little girl's silence echoed through a courtroom, a police department, and the hearts of an entire community. Her name was Ellie Monroe. Just 3 years old, with chestnut curls, wide brown eyes, and a favorite pair of bunny slippers she wore almost everywhere. She had always been bubbly, talking to her dolls, singing nursery rhymes, and asking questions faster than her mother could answer them. That is, until the night everything changed. It was just after 10 p.m. on a stormy Thursday when police responded to a 911 call from a neighbor who heard screaming. Ellie's mother, Michelle, was found unconscious in the kitchen, blood on her face and bruises forming along her arms. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken glass, and no stolen items. Nothing was taken, except her voice. Michelle slipped into a coma shortly after being rushed to the hospital. In the middle of all that chaos was Ellie, curled up in a corner, shaking. She was physically unharmed, at least according to the emergency responders. But when officers tried to speak to her, she didn't respond. Not with words, not with nods. She just stared at them, clutching a worn-out teddy bear. One officer later said it was as if she had disappeared inside herself. When child psychologists examined Ellie, they diagnosed her with acute selective mutism, a trauma response. No one could blame her. Her world had shattered in a single night. But in a strange twist of fate, she may have also been the only witness to what had really happened inside that house. Michelle's boyfriend, Ryan Teller, was immediately brought in for questioning. He claimed he had left the house before the incident, saying Michelle had been unstable lately and might have fallen. He presented an alibi, vague, weak, but not immediately disprovable. The police couldn't hold him without concrete evidence. And Ellie, the only person who might have known the truth, remained silent. As weeks turned into months, Michelle remained unconscious in the hospital. Doctors held out hope for recovery, but it was uncertain. Meanwhile, the police investigation stalled. Evidence was scarce. Prosecutors pushed to bring Ryan to trial based on circumstantial evidence, hoping something would emerge during proceedings. In the center of the legal storm was Ellie, the child who had once giggled nonstop and now hadn't said a single word in nearly 2 months. Her case caught the attention of child advocacy organizations across the country. The courts agreed to allow Ellie to testify under special conditions, should she become able or willing to speak. They brought in therapists, play specialists, art experts. But nothing worked. Ellie would sit quietly, eyes distant, mouth closed, no matter how kind the voice or gentle the questions. She had built a wall around her mind and heart, and nothing seemed strong enough to break through. Then came an unusual suggestion from a volunteer, child advocate: bring in a therapy animal. Someone mentioned Coda, a retired police dog with a calm temperament and a long history of working with children in crisis. Coda had once sniffed out a missing girl in the woods, and later comforted child victims during interviews. He was no ordinary German shepherd. He was something special. The judge, desperate for a breakthrough, approved the request. It was a long shot, but everyone agreed there was little left to lose. So on a gray Monday morning, Coda was led into the courtroom, not to chase criminals or sniff out danger, but to sit quietly beside a silent little girl whose story the world was waiting to hear. As the heavy wooden doors opened and Coda padded across the polished floor, no one in the room had any idea that the next few minutes would change everything. Door creaked open slowly, and a soft shuffle of paws echoed through the silent courtroom. Coda, the retired police dog, entered without hesitation. His golden brown fur was neatly brushed, his black harness fastened gently around his sturdy frame, and his intelligent eyes scanned the room before landing softly on Ellie. Officer Dan Riker, Coda's longtime handler, walked beside him, holding his leash loosely. He knew Coda didn't need guidance. The dog moved with a sense of purpose, as if he knew exactly why he had been brought there. Ellie sat at the small witness table, her tiny legs dangling from the chair, bunny slippers half off her feet. She stared ahead, unmoving, her teddy bear clutched tightly in her arms. Her therapist stood behind her, silently hoping that anything, would change today. Coda paused in front of Ellie, standing a few feet away. He tilted his head. His tail gave a gentle wag, and he slowly stepped forward. Still, Ellie didn't move. The judge leaned forward, curious. Prosecutors and defense attorneys alike watched with guarded interest. Everyone had seen this girl sit in silence for weeks. No one truly expected magic. But something about the room felt different. Koda sat down beside her. He didn't bark. He didn't sniff. He simply sat, waiting. A full minute passed. Then another. Then, almost imperceptibly, Ellie's hand moved. Her fingers loosened their grip on the bear. She looked at Coda, really looked, and then she reached out. A tiny hand landed gently on the thick fur of Coda's neck. Her fingers curled, gripping his warmth. Her therapist exhaled softly, stunned. It was the first physical interaction Ellie had initiated with anyone outside her family since the incident. Coda didn't move, but his tail thumped twice against the floor. Ellie looked into his eyes. Her lips parted slightly, as if she might say something, but no sound came. Still, the room felt electrified. Officer Riker knelt nearby. "He's happy to see you," he said gently. "He only sits that still when someone really needs him." Ellie didn't respond, but she didn't pull away either. For the next 15 minutes, Ellie stayed seated beside Coda, gently petting his fur. Her eyes remained wide, alert, and curious. She glanced around the room, at the judge, the people, watching her, and then back at the dog. Her therapist approached softly and whispered, "Ellie, you don't have to say anything. Just let us know if you're okay." Ellie didn't speak, but she gave a tiny nod. It was the first one anyone had seen from her in months. The judge leaned into his microphone. Let the record show the minor witness responded non-verbally with a nod. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a statement. But in a case where silence had been the greatest enemy, even a nod was a step toward the truth. After court adjourned for the day, Ellie remained with Coda in a quiet room off the side hall. She didn't talk, but she didn't retreat either. She began humming softly to herself, just a tune, a lullaby her mother used to sing. The therapist recorded the moment, noting that humming was often the first sign of emotional opening. Later, that evening, Dan Riker sat in his car with Coda in the back seat, reviewing the day. "You felt something in her, didn't you, boy?" he said aloud. Coda looked up at him in the mirror, those deep brown eyes seeming to understand far more than any animal should. Back at the foster home where Ellie was staying, her caretaker was stunned to see the little girl pick up a crayon. For the first time in weeks, she began drawing softly, slowly. The first image was of a big brown dog and a little girl holding his paw. And in that picture, both of them were smiling. Something had shifted. No one knew exactly what, but they all sensed it. A wall had cracked, and behind it was a truth that might finally come to light. The next morning, the courthouse buzzed with whispers. Word had spread quickly. The silent child had nodded, touched the dog, and even hummed a tune. It wasn't quite speech, but it was something. And in this case, something meant hope. Ellie arrived holding her caretaker's hand, bunny slippers on again, clutching her teddy bear in one arm. But now, Coda walked beside her, his harness gently gripped in her other hand like a leash. It wasn't official, but he was hers now, at least emotionally. The connection between them was undeniable. The judge had called for another closed session, this time with minimal staff present. The room felt quieter than ever. The prosecutor hoped for a miracle. The defense attorney looked increasingly nervous. And Officer Riker stood just outside the door, ready if Coda needed guidance. Ellie sat down at the witness table. Coda rested beside her, his body pressed lightly against her leg. He didn't move. He didn't even pant. It was as if he understood the gravity of the moment. The judge spoke softly. "Ellie, we know this is very hard. You don't have to say anything. But if you want to, if you remember something, we're here to listen." Silence. Then the judge leaned in again. "Do you feel safe here, sweetheart?" Ellie didn't look at the judge. She looked at Coda. And after a long pause, she did something no one expected. She raised a small hand and pointed straight at the dog. Then she spoke. "He knows." 2 simple words, barely above a whisper. But they struck like a bolt of lightning. The prosecutor stood in stunned silence, her lips parting in disbelief. The defense attorney's face went pale. The judge leaned forward. "Can you repeat that?" Ellie didn't hesitate this time. She looked straight ahead, her voice slightly louder. "He knows." Murmurs rippled through the room. The court stenographer's hands flew across the keys. The therapist behind Ellie wiped away a tear. The judge, blinking back his own emotion, asked gently, "Ellie, do you mean Coda knows what happened?" Ellie nodded. The judge noted it immediately for the record. No one in the room could speak for several moments. Even the most seasoned officers had never seen something quite like this. A traumatized toddler, finally breaking her silence, not to talk about the violence she had seen, but to point to the only being she fully trusted. And her message was chilling. The dog knows. It wasn't direct testimony. Not yet. But it meant something. Something deep. After the session, Officer Riker reviewed the transcripts with his supervisor. He remembered something that had been bothering him. The night of the incident, Coda had reacted strangely. He hadn't been inside the house long, but he'd growled at Ryan Teller, Michelle's boyfriend. As soon as he entered. It was dismissed at the time. Dogs growl all the time. But Riker had logged it anyway. Now those words from Ellie, "He knows," brought the moment surging back. Coda hadn't just growled out of instinct. Had he recognized aggression? Sensed danger? Reacted to something Ellie had seen but couldn't express? Riker dug out the original report. The time Coda growled matched exactly when EMTs discovered Michelle on the floor. And now Ellie had spoken. Was this a coincidence? Or the missing piece? The prosecutor, invigorated, filed a motion to introduce new behavioral evidence into the case. Meanwhile, Ellie's therapy team began a new approach, letting her use Coda as a communication bridge. Instead of answering questions directly, Ellie could respond while touching the dog. Her comfort and clarity improved daily. Back at her foster home that evening, Ellie sat on the floor drawing again. This time, she drew something different. Her mother lying down, a man with angry red scribbles around his hands, and a big dog standing in front of her, growling. The therapist stared at it in awe. It wasn't just art. It was memory. And it all started with 2 impossible, unforgettable words. He knows. The phrase, "he knows," echoed through every hallway of the courthouse. It became more than a statement. It became a catalyst. Prosecutors who had been cautiously holding the line now went on the offensive. The defense attorney who once seemed smug now looked haunted. Even Judge Callahan, a seasoned veteran of difficult cases, admitted behind closed doors, "We may have just witnessed the beginning of a truth we weren't prepared to hear." Officer Dan Riker couldn't shake the feeling that Ellie's words held more weight than anyone realized. Coda wasn't just present during the night of the incident. He had reacted. He remembered that night clearly. As the officer assigned to secure the scene, he'd arrived with Coda within minutes of the call. Riker found his original incident log and sat down to review it. He remembered thinking something felt off even then, but with no physical evidence and a suspect who denied wrongdoing, the case had gone cold. But the report from that night now read like a clue-filled script. Coda growled and positioned himself between suspect Ryan Teller and minor Ellie Monroe in hallway. Refused to disengage until verbally commanded. Behavior noted as irregular. Riker had written that line without knowing what it would mean 2 months later. Coda wasn't a skittish dog. He didn't growl unless he sensed true danger or fear. And he had positioned himself between Ellie and Ryan. That wasn't just instinct. That was protection. With that in mind, Riker reached out to the district attorney and asked to review body cam footage from that night. It had been archived, standard procedure, but no one had watched it carefully after the initial case. Fizzled out. With a court assistant's help, Riker pulled the video. What he saw gave him chills. In the footage, Ryan Teller stands near the hallway, arms folded, voice calm but defensive. EMTs are tending to Michelle inside the kitchen. Then Coda walks in, alert, ears up. He stops cold when he sees Ryan, and that's when it happens. A low, rumbling growl. Not the kind dogs use for strangers. The kind they use for threats. Riker. Fast-forwarded, heart racing. Coda walks over to Ellie, who's barely visible, curled up on the floor, and sits directly in front of her. He doesn't leave her side until Riker himself calls him away. It was subtle. Easy to miss. But now, in light of Ellie's words, it became critical evidence. He clipped the segment and emailed it to the prosecutor. That same afternoon, Ellie had another therapy session. Coda sat beside her as always. The therapist showed her a picture of a courtroom. "Do you remember going here, Ellie?" She asked gently. Ellie nodded. The therapist then held up a photo of Ryan Teller, taken from court records. Ellie's face changed. Not fear, not anger, but something deeper. Her lips pressed tightly together. Her hand went instinctively to Coda's back. Then she whispered a new word. Liar. The therapist blinked. "What was that, sweetheart?" Ellie looked at her again. "He's a liar." It was the clearest sentence she had spoken yet. When the therapist reported it to the court, the statement couldn't be ignored. With 2 voluntary verbal responses and 2 corroborating behaviors from Coda, prosecutors moved to reopen the investigative evidence. The judge granted approval. Later that night, Riker sat in his office, staring at Coda. "You knew all along," he whispered, "and now she's telling us what you couldn't." He gently scratched behind Coda's ears, and the old dog rested, his head on Riker's knee, as calm and steady as ever. The case was changing. Evidence was surfacing. Ellie was talking. And for the first time in weeks, justice no longer felt like a fading hope. It felt like a path, rediscovered. And that path started with a growl, a gesture, and the unwavering loyalty of a dog who refused to forget. Ellie had never said much to anyone after the night. Her world fell apart. But as her trust in Coda deepened, so did her willingness to express herself. Not through words, but through crayons. Her therapist, Ms. Calder, had started keeping a special notebook filled with Ellie's drawings. Most were simple: flowers, dogs, stick figures. But lately, the pictures had grown darker, more detailed. And one morning, Ellie quietly handed over a page without being asked. The moment Miss Calder saw it, her breath caught in her throat. Drawn with surprising clarity, it depicted a kitchen. A woman was on the floor, with red marks around her head. Standing over her was a tall figure with angry lines radiating from his face. Stick figure rage. and in the doorway stood a dog, its teeth bared, eyes large, growling. Behind the dog, in the corner, was a little girl with tears drawn in blue. Crayon. It wasn't just a drawing. It was memory. Mrs. Calder immediately photographed the page and submitted it to the prosecutor. An art therapist was called in to analyze Ellie's images. The conclusion? Highly consistent with trauma-based recollection. The accuracy of the layout, matching the real kitchen's position, was chilling. Even more haunting was that Ellie had drawn Ryan with red hands, something therapists often saw in children representing violence or guilt. Prosecutors presented the drawing during a closed hearing. The judge studied it carefully, noting the emotional precision. Though not direct testimony, the drawing was now a crucial piece of evidence, especially when combined with Ellie's previous verbal statements and Coda's behavioral history. Meanwhile, investigators dug deeper into the timeline. Neighbors recalled seeing Ryan leave the house after Michelle's screams, but before emergency vehicles arrived. A security camera from a nearby gas station placed him a block away, minutes before his call claiming he was across town. His alibi, already weak, now crumbled entirely. At the same time, Ellie began drawing more. Her next picture was even more devastating. It showed a man grabbing the woman's wrist. This time, Ellie labeled them Mommy and Ryan. She also drew herself hiding in a closet, marked Me. When asked who told her to hide, Ellie simply pointed to Coda and smiled. That smile held more than warmth. It held trust and truth. Ellie's foster mother, watching her at home, noticed a shift. She's brighter, she told the therapist. She still doesn't talk much, but she's freer, like she isn't scared anymore. At bedtime, Ellie began placing her drawings beside Coda's bed. It became a quiet ritual, one picture each night, as if she were unburdening herself. Page by page, she never explained them aloud. She didn't have to. Each image told a story the world was now willing to hear. The media caught wind of the case's developments. The silent witness became the phrase splashed across headlines. But those closest to the case knew better. Ellie wasn't silent anymore. She was speaking in the only way she could, and every crayon stroke pulled the truth closer to the surface. Officer Riker visited her again one afternoon, bringing Coda in for a private session. Ellie ran straight to the dog, hugging him tightly. Riker knelt down. "Hi, Ellie," he said gently. "Can I ask you something?" Ellie looked up. "Do you remember what Coda did that night?" She nodded. "What did he do?" She touched her chest with one hand, then placed the other on Coda's head. "He protected me." Riker swallowed hard. Yeah, he did." By the end of that week, the drawing, Ellie's whispered words, and Ryan's shattered alibi were compiled into a new case summary. The tide had turned. The jury would no longer be hearing speculation. They'd be hearing a story told through color, truth, and a child's growing courage. And that story had a hero with fur and 4 paws. While Ellie's drawings were moving hearts and reshaping the trial, a quiet revelation was happening behind the scenes, one that would soon shift the case into uncharted territory. Officer Riker, driven by Ellie's bravery and Coda's unwavering loyalty, began combing through every piece of evidence from the original investigation. It was late one night, long after most had gone home, when he opened a backup folder from the department's digital archive labeled Body Cam Overflow. It contained discarded or mislabeled audio and video files from that stormy night. Riker clicked through one after another, mostly static. Footsteps, murmured Officer Chatter, until he found a file labeled simply Audio Beta R3. He hit play. The sound was faint, fuzzy with static, but a few seconds in, a child's voice broke through. High-pitched, trembling, and barely audible. Riker leaned forward and turned up the volume. He heard Mommy. The words were chilling. Riker froze. It was unmistakable. The voice was Ellie's. The timestamp placed the clip at precisely 10:09 p.m., 3 minutes after officers arrived, and just moments before Coda growled at Ryan. The clip had never been reviewed closely, assumed to contain only background noise. But now it was a smoking gun. Riker immediately contacted the DA's office. An audio forensics team was brought in overnight. They ran enhancements, verified the voice pattern, and confirmed that no adults were speaking at that moment. The words were clear, if heartbreaking. "He hurt Mommy." In the courtroom the next day, the prosecution moved swiftly to introduce the enhanced audio as new evidence. The defense team objected, arguing it was hearsay. But Judge Callahan, visibly moved after hearing the recording in chambers, ruled it admissible based on its timing, the age of the child, and its corroboration with other evidence, including Ellie's drawing, her verbal cues, and Coda's documented behavior. For the first time, Ellie's voice, captured in real time, on the night of the attack, was heard in court. The courtroom was packed when the clip was played. Ellie sat beside Coda, unaware of the stir her voice had caused. As the audio echoed from the speakers, a hush fell over the crowd. "He hurt Mommy." It was soft, but it was real. A pin could have dropped in that room. Ryan Teller's face flushed. He avoided eye contact with everyone. His attorney looked stricken. Even the jury, who had remained composed through weeks of subtle, slow-building evidence, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked down. Others looked directly at Ryan, their expressions hardening. For the prosecution, this was the turning point. After the session, Ellie returned to her foster home and drew another picture. This one was different. She and Coda were sitting in the courtroom together. Her mother stood nearby, smiling, whole and healthy. Above them was a son, and in large, carefully printed letters, Ellie had written, "I'm not scared." Miss Calder gently asked her, "What made you feel that way?" Ellie didn't hesitate. "Coda stays. He keeps the bad away." The emotional impact of the audio rippled far beyond the courtroom. Media outlets quickly picked up the story. They lost tape. "Child's voice from night of assault stuns court," read one headline. Another simply said, "Ellie speaks." Meanwhile, the prosecution reviewed their remaining witnesses and evidence. They had a complete picture now, the scene captured in Ellie's drawing, her spoken words to the judge and therapist, Coda's behavior, Ryan's destroyed alibi, and now the haunting audio from the night itself. Everything aligned. The jury was no longer facing fragments of testimony or uncertain memories. They were facing a truth that had survived silence, trauma, and time, told by a little girl who didn't need long speeches to be heard. As for Coda, he continued doing what he always had, sitting silently beside Ellie, steady and strong. And, though he would never say a word, everyone in that courtroom understood now. He knew. It was the final week of the trial. The courtroom, once doubtful and dim with uncertainty, now radiated tension and anticipation. Prosecutors had carefully presented a powerful chain of evidence. Ellie's drawings, the lost audio file, Coda's reaction, and Ryan Teller's collapsing alibi. But something was still missing, a final moment of clarity. The jury needed to feel the truth, not just see it on paper. Judge Callahan called a special closed hearing. The purpose was simple: to ask Ellie, gently and with full legal protection, if she wanted to say anything more. No pressure, no questions. Just space to speak, or not. Ellie entered the courtroom wearing her favorite yellow dress with sunflowers. Coda walked beside her as usual, tail swaying softly. But today, she didn't seem nervous. She walked tall. At least, as tall as a 3-year-old could, and clutched Coda's harness like a lifeline. The courtroom fell silent as she took her seat. Even the usually stoic jurors leaned forward ever so slightly. Judge Callahan's voice was calm, warm. "Ellie, we're proud of you. You've already helped us so much. You don't have to say anything at all. But if you want to, we're here. We're listening." Ellie looked at him. She didn't blink. Then she stood. Coda rose with her, standing close. She placed her hand on his back. With surprising clarity, her small voice filled the room. "Coda kept me safe." A wave of emotion swept across the courtroom. Some gasped. One juror wiped tears from his eyes. Even the defense lawyer lowered his gaze, lips pressed into a thin, silent line. The judge, visibly moved, leaned forward. "Ellie, can you tell us anything more?" She nodded slowly. Her voice, though soft, did not tremble. He growled at Ryan. "Because Ryan was hurting Mommy. He didn't let him come near me." Gasps, audible now. Realizations bloomed in every mind present. The prosecutor quickly asked the judge's permission to submit her statements as direct testimonial evidence, given her age, trauma history, and clarity of speech. The judge approved on the spot. Ryan Teller sat frozen, color draining from his face. For weeks, he had watched the prosecution build a case from fragments, believing, or perhaps hoping, they would never assemble the full truth. But here it was, from the voice of a child. Simple, honest, undeniable. Ellie wasn't done. She looked toward the defense table, then back to the judge. Her eyes sparkled not with fear, but with something stronger. "Resolve." He said Mommy fell, but he's lying. "I saw." The courtroom was breathless. Coda, standing still beside her, didn't need to do anything. He was simply there, steady, silent, but in his stillness was power, the kind that had protected Ellie when no one else could. The judge looked to the jury. No words were needed. They had heard the truth, not through expert testimony or digital forensics, but through the voice of a child who had finally found the strength to speak. After the hearing, Ellie returned to the hallway where Miss Calder knelt down to hug her. "You did something so brave today, Ellie," she whispered. Ellie hugged Coda tightly. "He was brave first. I just followed him." That night, the courtroom transcript was distributed to both legal teams. It was clear. Ellie's testimony had struck the final blow. There were no loopholes left. No more arguments to twist the story. The media flooded the courthouse steps. Headlines exploded. 3-year-old breaks silence. He hurt Mommy. Toddler's testimony stuns courtroom. Guilty verdict now certain? Dog and child together deliver justice. Inside the prosecutor's office, Dan Riker gently patted Coda's head and whispered, "She did it, buddy. You helped her find the truth." Coda rested his chin on Riker's knee and closed his eyes. And for the first time since that stormy night, the darkness was lifting. The courtroom was packed on the morning of the verdict. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder outside the courthouse, whispering over their phones, scribbling notes into notepads. The world was watching, not just because of the crime, but because of how it had been revealed. A child's voice, once lost in trauma, had echoed louder than any prosecutor's argument. Ellie didn't attend that day. Her therapist and foster mother agreed she had done enough. She stayed home, safe in her favorite pajamas, coloring beside Coda, who had been granted official comfort companion status by the state. Inside the courtroom, tension hummed like a low electric current. The jury filed in slowly, their expressions unreadable. Ryan Teller sat rigidly at the defense table, jaw clenched, eyes red-rimmed. He had barely spoken in the last few days, his confident smirk long gone. Judge Callahan addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, have you reached a verdict?" The foreman stood. "We have, Your Honor." Every breath held. Every heartbeat felt loud. On the count of felony assault against Michelle Monroe, we find the defendant, Ryan Teller, guilty. Murmurs. Relief. One woman gasped quietly. On the count of child endangerment. Guilty. The prosecutor exhaled. Even she hadn't dared expect a unanimous verdict on all counts. The judge turned to Ryan, who sat frozen in his chair. Mr. Teller, this court finds you guilty as charged. Sentencing will follow next week. You are remanded to custody immediately. Two bailiffs approached. Ryan didn't resist. He stood, blank and pale, as they cuffed his wrists and led him away. Justice, real justice, had arrived. Outside, the crowd erupted. Reporters scrambled to deliver the news. Toddler's testimony secures conviction. One headline blared. Silent no more. Ellie's words seal fate of abuser. Back at her foster home, Ellie didn't fully understand what a verdict was. But she noticed how everyone smiled when the phone calls came in. Miss Calder crouched beside her and said, "He won't hurt anyone anymore. You're safe now, forever." Ellie looked at Coda and back at her drawing pad. She grabbed a blue crayon and began sketching Dot later that evening. She held up her picture to show her therapist Dot. It showed her and her mom standing in a garden. They were holding hands. In front of them was Coda, sitting tall, wearing a medal. And above them, in her careful handwriting, she'd written, "We're okay now." Tears welled in Miss Calder's eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, you are." Michelle Monroe eventually woke from her coma weeks later, disoriented, weak, but alive. One of the first photos shown to her was Ellie hugging Coda in court, with the headline clipped from a newspaper. She wept and whispered, "She was so brave." Ellie was slowly reintegrated into her mother's life under careful supervision, beginning with daily hospital visits. The first time, Michelle saw her daughter run down the hallway with a crayon drawing and Coda at her side. She burst into tears. "She never let go of him," Michelle whispered, "even when I couldn't hold on to her." Months later, inspired by the case, a bill was introduced in the state legislature called Ellie's Law, requiring therapy animals be made available to child witnesses in trauma-related cases. The bill passed with overwhelming support, setting a national precedent. Officer Dan Riker retired Coda permanently after the trial. He no longer needed to serve. He had already completed the most important mission of his life. Coda spent his days at home now, often visiting Ellie and Michelle, lounging on sunny porches or napping beside easels covered in finger paint. And Ellie? She never returned to silence. Her words, once stolen by fear, had become her greatest strength. She continued therapy, attended school, and wrote stories, often about a dog named Coda who saved the world. And while many still talk about the verdict, the drawings, or the headlines, those closest to her knew the truth. Justice wasn't just found in the courtroom that day. It was found in the bond between a girl and her dog, and in two small, whispered words that changed everything. He knows.